Hey everybody, this is Perch. I really need to get better at naming the video titles. I'm like looking at a bunch that I'd recorded like a long time ago, and this one says "Come Together," which is either some kind of vague kind of peace ask or a kind of dirty porno video. I don't know what it means. And then here's another one that's called Wolverine Good Bad question mark. Again, I don't remember what that was. It was recorded in mid-January. So I don't know. Anyway, the purpose of this video, and I want to kind of lay out some thoughts. I suspect some of you will agree with parts, some of you will agree with nothing. I don't know. But and there's a different video I have somewhere. A viewer has asked me, hey, it's a 5-year anniversary of Bobby Drake being outed in X-Men by Bendis, and how's that aged, etc. This video isn't about that, but it's about Bendis. So, for the first part of this video, I'm going to make a big defense of Bendis. Okay, we're going to give this a shot. Brian Michael Bendis kind of got, I would say, had done a bunch of work, but had kind of come into the more mainstream consciousness through Daredevil. And he had done, a number of little different things at Marvel, but he had a style that was unique. Now, a lot of his style to me reminded me of Joss Whedon, and Joss was very popular at the time. He was about to come in and do the Astonishing X-Men run, and it was following up from Grant Morrison. By the way, that Joss Whedon Astonishing X-Men run, I think, benefited from two things. One, it had been a while since you had just a focused kind of core group of X-Men doing X-Men things and not getting involved in kind of a lot of rando characters or new characters. It was really, it was X-Men that we know. It was, all the characters were relatively kind of known. You had some new villains in there and you had some old villains in there. And it was, by and large, it was kind of punchy and relatively confined. And, Joss Whedon's style was popular at the time. It hadn't been mimicked by 8,000 other people. And so it felt fresh, but it also felt like it was returning to X-Men comics as, X-Men comics. It felt like it was putting the X-Men front and center, which, we hadn't had for a little while, for a minute. So anyway, Brian Michael Bendis very much felt to me like a Joss Whedon clone. And, I say that as kind of a, half bad, half good thing. His style at the time was, Joss's style was popular. So Bendis being a clone of something popular, not the worst thing in the world. You can make the argument it was like, as an artiste, you should have your own unique voice. Yeah, and there was. I mean, Bendis, it wasn't a direct clone of Joss Whedon's style, but it had that kind of more punchy dialogue and everything else going on. And then, I'm skipping a little bit of history here, but then Bendis gets the Avengers job, and they decide to do something somewhat bold with the Avengers, which had kind of really just in the normie view of things, the Avengers were not in their best place as a comic title. You'd had a bunch of things that happened actually the decade earlier, but just a bunch of kind of nonsense leading up to the whole Onslaught and Heroes Reborn stuff. The Heroes Reborn stuff didn't really age or do well. There's a reason why when Rob Liefeld's talking about, his success at Marvel, he talks about kind of Deadpool and X-Force and stuff like that. And he isn't really talking about, hey, his time doing the Avengers. That doesn't come up as much from him. That's not a shot against Rob. It's just that wasn't remembered that fondly. And then you had the Kurt Busiek, George Perez, which was pretty epic. That was a great little Avengers run. But then it seemed to lose some momentum somewhere along the way. I think that Kang storyline probably did it off to some extent. It started to lose focus a little bit for readers, and then it kind of wandered. And then you actually had a couple good runs that everybody seemingly forgets. You had a Jeff Johns run in there. You had a couple other things that were happening in that title. And so Bendis came on at a time when the Avengers was somewhat of an afterthought and weak. And what's funny is in 2025, people like to crap on Bendis pretty heavily because they are primarily thinking about, his run, his type of DC, the John Kent age up stuff, and to some extent, some of the his time on X-Men or Guardians, which really never landed anywhere good. That's really where people think of Bendis. But if you remember Bendis from the time of the New Avengers and kind of leading up to Secret Invasion and everything that or Civil War and then Secret Invasion, everything he did around that time period, his Avengers run was pretty epic is too strong a word, certainly, but well received is not too strong a word. It did well. It sold well. It revitalized the comic, and I've seen people give the not excuse, but basically claim, well, it was really the movie. The answer is no. You can't have it both ways. You can't say on one hand that the MCU and the movies are relevant to comics, and then the other hand say, well, the only reason why Bendis was so successful is because of the movies. You can't have it both ways, and the correct answer is no. It's not because of the movies. Bendis' success on these titles was, from good storytelling and a lot of what he did in bringing interest to those titles, which he did. So that's I think he deserves credit for several years of kind of continual storylines where he was able to do a pretty good job reinvigorating that franchise. And so if you're wondering, hey, why did DC go hard for him? Why did Marvel kind of bend over and let him do whatever he wanted with X-Men and all this other stuff? Well, the big reason is he was successful at really bringing a lot of money and a lot of readers, a lot of attention to the Avengers. He did a good job. I mean, hell, not just a good job. He did a great job. He put it back in a place where it was powerful. And so that gives you in comics, being able to do that and sustain it for a long period of time. And honestly, his events during that era, the Secret Invasion event, the Asgard event that he did, God, why am I spacing on the name of that? 4 issues. It was relatively small. Dark Reign was a pretty major success sales-wise for Marvel. It sold a lot of books, and it got a lot of people buying books they don't normally buy. Well, Christ, why can't I remember? Olivia Capelle and Bendis. Fuck, I'm getting old. God, why can't I remember? Siege. Yes, Siege. Thank you. For all the people who are screaming at the video right now. Yes, Siege. Look, I think being able to deliver those kinds of numbers for that long is a major accomplishment. And he pulled it off. And so that's the good part of Bendis. That's the part that I think, if fair is being fair, and it's important to be fair, you got to give him a lot of credit for that time period and what were several years of putting up not just big numbers, but the biggest numbers at Marvel on the board. I think the only guy who was giving him some competition, but was doing it for just one title was Rick Remender, who his X-Force book was also a pretty big juggernaut, but even then, still not at the level of Bendis with the Avengers. He deserves tons of credit for that. So then the question becomes, what went wrong? The biggest, I think, in all this was, as Bendis got more and more popular and sold more and more at Marvel, editorial started to lean back a little bit and let Bendis do more of, what he wanted to do. And if you talk about talk to creators, talk to writers and artists, they will tell you they desire that too. If they get a sales success in a book, if they start getting, putting real numbers up on the board, then they expect some level of autonomy. They don't want the editors telling them what to do. I think Bendis and what happened to him at Marvel and then later at DC is pretty much the ultimate cautionary tale of why that logic falls apart. I've heard a lot of people I really respect talk about how I don't really want an editor, get in my way and, tell me what to do or anything else. Well, the reality is, Bendis with Daredevil, certainly, Bendis with the Avengers did have a relatively decent editorial hand that set things in motion. Now, certainly, Alana Smith, Todd Brevoort, others kind of, fell asleep at the wheel toward the end of his Avengers run and let Bendis kind of do what he wanted to do. But at that point, enough subplots, enough things had been put in motion. It was kind of hard to fuck up at that point. It was, you could certainly do anything, but it was harder. when then he made the jump to doing Iron Man and Civil War II and X-Men and Guardians, all of those runs are entirely forgettable. But all of them have one thing in common, which was the editorial kind of direction, heavy hand in his work was not heavy at all. It was extremely loose. And so you had last minute script changes. You had basically poor coordination with other writers and other lines. And you had the kind of stuff where I would like to believe, and this is what I mentioned in the other video, that the Bobby, you're gay moment from Jean Grey, a good editor would have said, hey, look, okay, this is not how you do it. If you want to have the character, if you want to kind of reveal he's gay and kind of go into that, there's a lot of kind of nuanced ways you could do it. There's a lot of ways you could do it. This is a terrible way to do it. Everyone will dislike this. The people who are upset of him being gay will dislike it. The people who are LGBTQ supporters will hate it. I mean, everybody's going to hate this way. Don't do this. A strong editor would have pulled that off. Anyway. And then, of course, he went over to DC and he had basically he was able to sell DC on the idea of, hey, I'm one of Marvel's top writers. Hey, the company is, getting in the way. And basically he sold their interference and all this other stuff really got in the way of me doing what I need to do. Kind of let me come in and let me cook. And he was if the truth is to be told, he was offered Batman or Superman. He picked Superman. I still think there's a whole other world where Bendis goes on Batman and Tom King does not. And we get I think Bendis on Batman probably would have been pretty decent, or at least I had the potential to be more decent. I think the Batman editorial office was a little bit stronger during that time period. I think he would have worked better with that group as opposed to Tom King, who got his editor fired basically, and then bragged about it. So I think there was a whole what if scenario where Bendis got to do a kind of different form of his Daredevil run with Batman that might have been quite good. And instead he went to Superman. Of course, he did Legion. DC made the same mistake Marvel did, and they rolled out too many things all at once. You could do a kind of version of Young Justice, and you can, do this imprint and blah, 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 all saying, here's Naomi, why don't you do that? And they let him just do a bunch of things where anyone in their right mind would have said, now hang on a second, this isn't let's get the guy in, let's get him stable, let's get him accustomed to this universe, let's get him cooking, and then we'll let off some of the guardrails. But anyway, I say all this, it's just an interesting reflection on my part. So now it's up to you. What do you think about all this? I think there was a world where Bendis actually was a pretty damn good player for DC. And then for Marvel. What am I saying? For Marvel during the Avengers and during that early run. And then I think it went off the rails. And I do blame lack of strong editorial, letting the creator do whatever they wanted, kind of things running amok. Ego got way, way, way out of hand. And that's where we left it. But you cannot ignore the fact that there was a period of time where that guy put up some major dollars up on the board. So what say you? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, of course. I say of course, but who's liking and subscribing these days? I don't know. Anyway, thanks for listening.